The Atari Jaguar was Atari's final home console, released in the United States during November 1993, the EU during the June of 1994, and Japan in the December of 1994. Atari claimed that the Jaguar was the world's first 64-bit home console, although this is certainly an area that is open to some debate. The Atari Jaguar utilised two custom-designed 32-bit processors called Tom and Jerry. These combined over a 64-bit data bus, and it was this combined power of the two 32 bits using the 64-bit bus that led Atari to claim that the Jaguar was indeed a 64-bit system. Being generous, I will say that the Jaguar is a hybrid 32-bit 64-bit machine at best, as you would generally consider a machine's bit rating to be based off of its CPU and not its data bus. Anyway, beyond that, the Jaguar also featured a Motorola 68000 chip as a system management processor and a very generous for the time 2MB of system RAM. The inclusion of the 68000 proved to be somewhat controversial, despite it being a logical choice for its familiarity, but this did lead to many lazy ports of existing 16-bit titles, as rather than grapple with the complexities of two separate processors, many programmers chose to use the 68000 to operate game logic. The few titles that did use the Jaguar's hardware as it was intended, though, are generally the more impressive ones in the system's somewhat small library of 50 or so commercially developed games. As a piece of hardware, the Jaguar is also notorious for its absolute behemoth of a controller. Alongside the traditional D-pad and three face buttons plus start and select, the pad incorporated a full numeric keypad which could be utilised by games for additional functionality. Indeed, many titles shipped with a clip-on overlay for the numeric pad to indicate which button performed which function. This was quite useful in titles such as The Port of Doom or Aliens vs Predator, but less so in more common platform titles such as Pitfall and Rayman. Now, despite a huge marketing campaign by Atari based around the slogan of "Do the Math," the system was ultimately a colossal failure. Despite good initial word of mouth and a huge number of pre-orders in the European market, which were rumoured to be somewhere in the region of 2 million units of hardware, manufacturing issues with Atari's chosen hardware partner of IBM, yes, IBM, the guys that made PCs, caused significant delays in getting hardware to the market, and ultimately only approximately 250,000 units were sold globally worldwide by the time Atari stopped manufacturing the system and effectively discontinued it in late 1995. That isn't to say Atari didn't try. They tried to boost the system's popularity by launching a CD-ROM add-on, which was announced at the time of the hardware's original launch, but didn't appear until September of 1995. This hardware was an abject failure in and of its own, though, with only 11 software titles being released for it commercially and rumoured to be less than 20,000 units of the hardware actually sold to customers. Now, despite the system's flaws and its abject failure to gain any market share, there is still an awful lot of nostalgia for the system, and some of its games are still held in very high regard. Aliens vs Predator is often considered to be one of the system's killer app titles. At the time of its launch, it was probably the best console-based FPS on the market, offering 3 different campaigns to the player, one each for the Marines, the Aliens and the Predator, some really nice looking fully textured environments, and a pretty good frame rate along with some digitised graphics and violence. AVP was also joined by a pair of very commendable conversions of ID Software's legendary titles Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, the latter of which was easily superior to the already on the market Super Nintendo and 32X ports. Iconic British coder Jeff Minter produced the absolutely stunning stunning game Tempest 2000 for the system. A truly amazing piece of coding, this game managed to show off the system in a way that perhaps no other title released for it did, ultimately being converted to the PC platform to reach a wider market. And it was so popular and has so much cachet amongst gamers that many years later Jeff Minty himself produced an unofficial sequel, TXK, for the PS Vita, which led to some issues with the current holders of the Tempest license. Atari themselves attempted to show off the power of their system with the launch title Cybermorph, a fully 3D polygonal shooter in the vein of Star Fox, although unlike Star Fox, Cybermorph offered you full roaming 3D environments rather than forcing you to play on rails. Whilst it does look quite crude by modern standards, at the time this was light years ahead of anything any other consoles were producing in terms of 3D environments, such as Nintendo's aforementioned Star Fox games or Sega's own Mega Drive port of its Virtua Racing arcade system. The Atari Jaguar version of Ubisoft's Rayman is an absolutely stunning 2D title for the system. Yes, you can get this game on other platforms such as the PlayStation, but the Atari Jaguar version was the original version of the game. This was the lead platform for its development, and in my opinion it's the best way to play it, but you can be the judge of that yourselves. Despite these great titles being available for the system, it was also home to some true stinkers, such as the legendarily bad driving game Club Drive and truly awful Mortal Kombat ripoff Kasumi Ninja. Seriously, do not ever play these games. They are terrible. Interestingly, in the early 2000s, the Atari Jaguar had somewhat of a second life in the United Kingdom when a deal was struck between Telegames, who'd purchased all remaining stock from Atari Europe, and high street retailer Game was made, in which the Atari Jaguar and a number of its titles were sold within branches of Game. The hardware itself was sold for the knockdown price of $29.99, and the games were sold from anywhere from $9.99 to $59.99. This was short-lived, however, and it's unsure as to whether Game did shift all their stock or not. So that's the Atari Jaguar. Ultimately, it was a failure, a big failure, and it finally killed off Atari as a hardware manufacturer. Atari just couldn't get it right with the Jaguar. It was ultimately underpowered and too late to the market, with confused marketing and very little support. Literally no major third parties apart from Ubisoft supported the system. There were no games from companies like Electronic Arts, Ocean. Activision did a couple of titles, but nothing major, and it was left purely down to Atari to try and push the system, which they couldn't do. The money wasn't there, the goodwill wasn't there, and ultimately the company wasn't there. But if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like. If you want to see more of my stuff, subscribe to the channel as well, ring the bell, and feel free to come and see me over on Twitter. You can find me at 8_16_32bit, and you can also use that same tag to find me on Instagram. So until next time, this is Learned Rob saying so long for now.